Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in Waynesville, North Carolina. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. And I'm here today with Elizabeth Hazel. And we're going to be talking about her big little book of fixed stars, which I just did a review of recently. Welcome to the show, Liz.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on here. I had a lot of guests on the show last year, and then I got away from it a little bit, so it feels like time to have some folks back on and share some of the good work that people are doing out there. And I really enjoyed this book. I think it's wonderful to see there's not a lot of books on fixed stars, first of all.
There are, but a lot of them are huge and very expensive, or they're old, like Vivian Robson. And I love Robson. Don't get
God bless Vivian, but dude is old.
Well, it's actually 100 years old. I think
I know, right?
1922.
Yeah.
And so it's old, and he's very good, but I'm not sure the organization is good, and all of the positions are out of date.
Right.
You know, they're 100 years out of date, and that needed to be dealt with, because it's really the only list of stars in zodiacal order anywhere. And while I appreciate that Diana, what's her last name? Rosenberg. Yeah, she does hers in zodiacal order, but those books are, 2 inches thick for 6 signs, and she adds in so much stuff, it becomes laborious to find it. So I just wanted to give a quick roundup of a couple hundred stars. I think there's 250 stars and some cosmic intersections in the book, and then move on to.
I love the cosmic intersections, by the way. I'm a huge fan. We're going to talk about that.
Yes, we got a chart with that, so that's good. We got a crash test dummy. And then move on to a section on just basics on how to use them.
Yep.
And a little bit of a roadmap with, I did the Persian Royal Watchers and Hearts and Eyes. And
that's really cool. I love that too. Yeah.
Yeah, bird stars.
Groups of stars, heart stars. There's tail stars, right? Deneb this, Deneb that.
Head stars, eye stars, hair stars, whatever. But I think because those are such prominent and important stars for the most part, because they signify those parts are usually mag 1s, so it's good to get an idea of where they were. And then I did one of the danger zones, so really tricky stars that you want to watch out for. So just giving those little superficial overviews of kind of where things are in the sky. It's a way to not be overwhelmed, because there are thousands of stars, and doing those little vignettes was kind of a way to introduce people slowly and get them into it. And then in part 3, it's a collection of essays that I wrote over 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they're mostly about non-zodiacal constellations.
Yeah, and I really appreciated that, because, a lot of people, for instance, Ophiuchus, right? Which is not a friggin' sign, by the way, people. It's not a sign. It can't be a sign. But it's a really cool constellation. And we can bring in Ophiuchus, we can bring in extra zodiacal constellations, no problem. Just don't try to make them signs.
Yeah, the zodiac is not the constellations anymore. They've kind of parted ways, but I did include Gemini and Capricorn at the end, and then you sort of were talking about, well, you should do a book like this just dedicated to zodiacal constellations.
I really love the way you did it. And I was feeling like I'm ready for more. That's one of the things that why I said, in my review, which you can find on Amazon, by the way, of the little book of fixed stars. In my review, one of the things I said that makes it a big book is, I said it's a big little book, and because those little vignettes, little though they are, they're dense, they're rich. There's a lot there in that little bit, and so it's big in the sense of it has a big impact for it, just like fixed stars, right? They're small, little points of light, but big impact, right? So it's big in that way.
Yes.
And I thought also it's big in that there's a lot of places you could go with this stuff, a lot of places. And I was really excited about that, because I was like, wow, I really like what you did with Gemini and Capricorn, and I would love to see more of that, whether it's you or somebody else who's inspired by what you did and said, hey, I'm going to write my take on these,
Right, but there's really no book that's just dedicated to the zodiac fixed stars. And I thought that was an interesting proposition.
Yeah.
And the fourth part is delineations, and we're going to go on that a little bit as we move along on this podcast. But again, that was something that just really wasn't out there, although Oscar Hoffman published a book a few months prior to mine that did have delineations.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm assuming that his are very different than mine because I was focusing a lot on the planet star attributions.
Yes. Yes.
It's
Yeah.
something that doesn't get used at all. So, there is star interpretation, but also it includes that planetary attributions to stars from Ptolemy that is just very unusual.
Yes. And I loved where you went with that. So there's this whole section in the book, and I'm just going to hold it up here. This is just a couple pages. Can you see that? Yeah.
It's
okay.
fuzzy,
So
but okay.
there's little blurbs here about different ways to use the stars, right? So one of the things you talk about is the planet attributions, which, when I first saw those, I thought, well, no, I thought to myself, why in the heck would I want to make a star a planet? Like, what? That's backwards. Like, and then one of the things that you point out here is that the order of the attribution is really important to pay attention to, right?
Yeah.
Because stars are so powerful. When they first show up in your consciousness, it kind of hits you. It's like a really good wine. It has a strong, aroma and it has a strong mouthfeel. And then on the back end, you get often a different kind of flavor on the back end, and it leaves you feeling a different way than when it first arrives, right? And I thought, man, that's a really great thing to point out, because that has been absolutely true in my experience of actually working with these stars and trying to communicate with them and sort of become a channel for them. Oh my goodness, some of them, when they first show up, it's like, whoa, what the heck have I gotten into here, right? If it's like Algol, for instance, right? She's Saturn, Jupiter, right? Shows up Saturn, like, whoa, man, like dangerous, scary, but you know what? She's got a sweet side. She's a goddess.
Well,
she's got a sort of protective guide. She's a guide, I think.
Well, there's a lot of protectiveness, and certainly Algol is used for protective star talismans.
Right.
But it depends really strongly on what someone has it attached to natally. Algol gets a horrible name, and I will agree 100%. Algol is a SOB in mundane charts. When it turns up in mundane charts, people die, animals die, huge disasters, piles of corpses. That's the name for the star in Chinese, as pile of corpses.
Right.
But in a personal chart, in your natal chart, it depends what it's conjunct. And let's say you have Sun conjunct Algol, you may wind up being in the jewelry business. And I literally had a woman client sit down, and I saw her Sun conjunct Algol, and I said, well, are you in any way in jewelry, fine gems, or mining? And she said, yeah.
Yeah, that Algol, the stone associated with Algol is diamond.
Is the diamond, yes.
And you know what? When I first started talking with her, I asked her about that, and I was like, so lady, I was like, I was like, the stone associated with you is the diamond, and I know ladies are particular about their diamonds, so is it okay if I, substitute? And she's like, no, I want my diamonds.
Yeah. And I had another client that had Jupiter conjunct Algol, and he was a metal welder.
Interesting.
And before her head was chopped off, and I think people skip the whole legend, right?
Yeah, they only go to the end, right?
That one little tiny part of the end, they don't even take the end of the end. They just take the part of the end they want to look at, where she got her head chopped off. But a Gorgon's skin was made of metal. And so it made perfect sense to me, especially with the Saturn Jupiter attribution, that somebody could be a metal welder or a metal worker, or work in intense heat, or with those high temperatures. and being very precision oriented, which is Saturn, and made perfect sense to me. But then I had another client that had Mars conjunct Algol when he was a wife abuser. So,
Yeah,
you know,
I've seen
not
I've seen
a friendly guy.
themes of abuse definitely with that star. There's a lot of and I think that's just a product of our culture, that our culture is very toxic in a lot of ways. There's a lot of toxicity, and when you in this star is a snake. It's a so we should do another group of stars with that are involved with snakes, right? Because there's a bunch of those, and
Yeah.
the toxicity always comes up in relation to those stars, because that's the other thing that I found with, like, Paracelsus said the poison is in the dose, right? Even water can be poison. If you drink too much water, it'll dilute your blood, and you won't have the magnetic field of your body will get disrupted in potentially deadly ways.
Yeah.
Even water, too much water. And so what I have found with stars like that is that the dosage is really important. Like a little bit goes a long way, kind of
Right.
thing. So yeah, I really enjoyed you going through the planet star attributions, and that idea that it can show up in one form, and then after time, in my opinion, it's after time of working with it, the outcome is more like the second star, right? Yeah. So I thought
Right.
that was
And think about this. Fixed stars are a lifetime thing. So
exactly.
it's really hard to see how they're going to work when you're 10 years old or even 20. But when you're 40 or 50, you can really see how they've played out a lot more, because it's very big picture.
It's an
It's
enduring
whole
energy.
life.
Yeah.
It's life themes. It's
Right.
not just a day or an event. It's your whole life. And these stars will, it's like, like the diagram that you showed in that book is stars are little story Sherpas. They carry little storylines with them. Terry Pratchett called it narrativium. And it's like threads of storylines that repeat over and over again. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. These storylines repeat again and again. King gets on throne, king gets overthrown, then he fights and gets it back. All these stories, nothing's new. Even Shakespeare wasn't new. So, stars that have been around for thousands and thousands of years, and people have had a relationship with the sky for tens of thousands of years.
Absolutely. I love
They
that.
become like little Sherpas with stuff that's gotten loaded on their backs, and from every culture. And once it gets stuck, it sticks. It's like Velcro. So a star may have meanings that come from very, very ancient times. It may have meanings that come from the Greeks. It may have meanings that come from Arabic manzils. It has meanings that come from China. It has meanings that come from Native America, and they're all true. You just have to see which myth thread is being woken up by the planet that's connecting with it.
Yep.
And every planet connects with the star in a different way. And if it's attributed to that planet, it's a little more true to form. And if it's attributed to that planet, and there's two planet attributions, and that planet's in aspect to that other planet, it like turns it up to 11.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you get, if we'll see in our sample charts here, anything that you see repeated in the birth chart from a star attribution, it goes wild. And especially the more stars you have attributed to that particular planet combination. If those planets are in aspect, the planets go wild. They just pick up that energy so much more, and they carry it through. And it's funny because we think Jupiter is such a great planet, right? It has this reputation to be lucky and good and big and all that. But I will tell you, like Castor, Gemini Castor. Castor is Alpha Gemini. It's the big star, although it's faded a bit, and it's attributed to Mercury. When I went in and researched all the planets, people, thousands of charts, and looking at who had what conjunct Castor, the people with Jupiter conjunct Castor have the most trouble with it.
Interesting.
Because it goes way overboard.
Right.
It goes way, way, way too far.
And that's essentially what the Discorsi, as they were known, the twins together, that's essentially what their problem was, right? They essentially started a civil war because they like stole their cousins' wives or something like that, wasn't it? Like they kind of yeah, went a little overboard with their, they you know they the positive side was that they were adventurers, they were part of Jason's um
The Argonauts.
to get the fleece and all that.
Yeah,
But
the
then
Argonauts.
it's kind of like that personality, it's restless. And if they don't have the fleece to go after, then they steal somebody's wife because bored.
Yeah, dyslexic
And you
twin
put Jupiter
presentation.
with a bored, mischief maker, and it's
Right.
like, yeah, you're gonna have some trouble.
Right. And Jupiter just tends to go overboard with Castor. It's just something that popped up again and again and again in chart. And the only one that manages to, of all the charts I looked at, that managed it well was Bruce Willis, who has Jupiter Castor in his 10th house, and it's trine Saturn. Saturn reins it in. So all that Castor emo stuff is he plays underdogs with that are emotionally stunted, but people still love him, and it minimizes how much that Jupiter crashes into his personal life, although obviously it has.
There
But
was definitely some drama here and there, yeah.
right, but he's managed to turn it into a kind of stereotype that he plays
Right, right.
of
Yep.
of the guy that's got the emotional range of a teaspoon, but boy, he can beat up the bad guys and be a superhero and a champion, and Nakatomi Towers.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that he's a good
Yokai.
example of the kind of actor who's just being himself, And then you have character actors. They're kind of scary to me because they can literally take on different personalities, hugely different personalities. And it's like, whoa, dude. You see a guy like Bruce Willis, you know what he's going to be, and because he's just being himself, he's being his chart, and it works.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. He mostly plays himself
yeah,
in a movie. It's
yeah,
a Bruce Willis movie. It's
right,
not a movie about something, it's Bruce
right.
Willis. Because
Yeah,
you watch
yeah,
Bruce
yeah,
Willis
yeah.
to see Bruce Willis, and that may be Jupiter Castor in his 10th house. Is that you
Right,
want to see him because it's always an adventure.
right.
But it's limited by that trine to Saturn. Saturn helps out. But when you don't have that tap from a controlling planet to Jupiter and Castor, it's like out of control. And I think James Barry was somebody that had Jupiter Castor, and his chart's a mess, but Jupiter Castor just made it worse. And
Mm,
it's that Peter Pan factor with James
yeah.
M. Barry.
That's you bring up a good point there too. Is Castor considered a Mag 1 star?
Yeah.
Is
Oh,
it?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So,
Right.
but,
Both Castor and Pollux, Alpha and Beta Gemini, are both Mag
yeah,
1s.
and really, to me, anytime you're dealing with an alpha star, most of the time it's the brightest star of the constellation, or it's like sticks out for, prominently in the figure of the constellation. And I think people misunderestimate the fact that, like for instance, Alpha Aries, Hamal, that's a major star to have a conjunction to, but people, because it's not a really bright star,
Right.
people kind of forget about it or diss it or whatever, and it's like it's a freaking fixed star, man.
Right.
It's very powerful.
It
um
certainly is. Yeah.
so all right, so there was, let's see, there was I wanted to point out the great job that you did with the different, so you talked about the planet attributions. You talk about also, yeah, now this might be a good lead into where we want to look at the charts. One of the other things that I thought, in addition to your essays, which, like I said, we could do a whole book on that, the cosmic structure. This was so refreshing to see you hit on this because it occurred to me when I was trying to figure out what the heck is the galactic center? What does it do? It occurred to me that it's a cosmic structure, right? It's
Yes.
part of the galactic equator. And the galactic equator is literally, the galactic equator is to the Milky Way what the ecliptic is to our system. It's the
Yes.
center road. It's the main road down the middle of the thing, right?
Right.
And now here's the thing. At this moment, for the only time in the 26,000 year cycle, the galactic equator is lined up exactly with another cosmic structure known as the winter solstice point. And this is the 2012 phenomenon that everybody was going to create a Mayan calendar, blah, blah, blah. This is what that's about. And so what you have here really is two major cosmic structures coming together. So you got a main road with another main road. You got basically Times Square.
Right. But bear in mind, we have our solar system on a plane. We have our galaxy on a plane. Then we have the super galaxy on another plane. So there's two things to keep in mind. There's intersections, which are one thing, like equinoxes and solstices are intersections of the ecliptic with the galactic equator. But there's also galactic centers. There's nexuses.
Right.
And there's a galactic center, we know about it, 26 Sag, but there's also a super galactic center at like 29 Virgo. So there's centers and there's intersections. And so again, like eyes and arms,
Yes.
you get the pathways that cross at an angle to one another because nothing is on a level plane. There is no up and down in space. Right. And galaxies are buddies. They like to hang out in groups in neighborhoods. So our super galaxy is the neighborhood that the Milky Way belongs to.
Right.
And the Milky Way is yet at an angle to that. So we're at an angle to the Milky Way. And the Milky Way is an angle to the super galaxy, which I believe is the Virgo super galaxy.
Yeah.
Or the Andromeda galaxy, one or the other. And they're super enormous.
Galaxy, I know that. Yeah.
They're super enormous. And then there are, of course, other galaxies that our solar system doesn't participate in because their neighborhoods are lots of dark space between here and there. So, but there's other neighborhoods. So including those intersection points to me is like, it's like the sign that says, you are here.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, this is something that I think goes a long way to understanding that the meaning comes from the astronomy itself, like if you get the astronomy, you can construct the meaning from that,
Some, yes, but I think
degree.
intersections are intersections. I mean, and with your work with Mercury, it's about crossroads. When you hit a crossroad, there's going to be a choice. There's going to be a merger. There's going to be things that you meet on the way. Crossroads are where things happen. It's, Mercury rules crossroads, and so does Hecate.
Yeah.
It's a very magical spot.
Yeah.
And then centers.
Sorry, go ahead. Didn't mean to.
No, centers like, the center of our galaxy, as well as the center of the super galaxy, is going to have a star nursery or multiple star nurseries where it's kicking out baby stars, but also there's invariably some kind of monster-sized black hole that's eating up the old stuff. So the new stuff's getting spewed out as the old stuff's going in.
Yeah.
There's a theory that black holes are the opposite, what pulsars are the opposite end of a black hole. Or something like that there's, the wormholes have one thing at one end and one at the other. I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert in astronomy, although I've read quite a bit about it, but I think the fact that there's so much stuff in space for an astrologer, I think there's always that sense of you have to corral the stuff you can work with.
Yeah.
And you can't use everything. If you used every fixed star, there would be so much crap in your chart, you'd never be able to read it. Yeah. If you used every asteroid, there'd be so much crap, you'd never be able to read it. All of a sudden, interpretation just gets impossible.
Yeah.
You have to have 3-week consultations with clients, and they're not going to do that. You need to be able to fit it into an hour. So you have to pick and choose. Yeah. And honestly,
that's why these themes that you come up with are so useful. The eyes and the hearts and the cosmic structures and So let's do that. Let's focus as if we are doing client work. And you want to go ahead and share your screen that you put together for us. I think one of the examples that you use in your essays at the end that show, just what you do with this, and where you bring these things that you mentioned early in the book, like cosmic structure, and you bring it to life in these essays. And my favorite one of those was Jrr Tolkien. because I feel like his work is, very recently in the zeitgeist. And so it just spoke to me in a particular way of like, yeah, this is immediate for me, but also in a way that evoked something that I had intuitively or instinctively known about his work, but hadn't quite intellectually grasped. So we'll get to that. I'll share that later. But um, do you have his chart? Do you want to go ahead and share it?
I do have his chart, and
Right.
I need you to let me share it.
Oh, I see.
We have to go through
Do I
that
have to
again.
make you the host again?
Well, or yeah, you should be able to assign let me share, but if you can't, I don't know. I always
Oh,
thought it was participants, but maybe it's screen share. I have not figured that out yet, apparently.
well, you're still the host.
Am I?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So you're looking for the button? I'm gonna pause this.
No, I've got it.
All right. So we
All right.
got the chart. For the purpose of the recording, I'll go ahead and read the data. It's January 3rd, 1892. 10 p.m. is a rectified time. That means somebody went through the trouble of matching his life events with his chart. You could just as easily use a sunrise chart, often is what I do with these charts that don't have but it's in, how do you say that? Bloemfontein, South Africa? Something like that. Bloemfontein.
Yeah, I'd assume Bloemfontein, maybe.
Bloemfontein, yeah.
Bloemfontein. I don't know if the E
Yeah,
or the I is pronounced, but yeah, it's
yeah,
South Africa. It's Afrikaner.
right.
So yeah, I think this is just his chart is just littered with star contacts. And that is not always true. And I make the point in my book that sometimes it's better not to have so many. Because you are the stars, biatch. And if you
There
want
is
a little
no
more
two
free
ways about
choice,
that.
there's a little more free choice if you have less.
And think about that for a second, because these beings, these are beings, and they exist outside of our system, right? And they are creative engines of the universe. In fact, the stars create the heavier elements, right? And so they are literally very much, like you said, large and in charge. It's not like planets.
Yeah.
Planets, the interesting thing about the Greeks is that their gods were so human,
Yeah.
And so, you're dealing with Mercury or you're dealing with Zeus, you're dealing with a human-like character but stars are much more, like you said, dominant in their energy. They can be overpowering.
Well, they're suns.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of times they are suns that are way, 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 way bigger than our sun. So think of them as little suns all scattered around the universe, casting out light. And the light we get from them could be tens of thousands of years old
Yeah.
because they're so far away. But that light is a tickle, it's a particular type of light, and stars are different colors depending on what chemicals they're made out of. And those colors make a difference too, but color has nothing to do really with the attributions. People threw out that theory, and the only two stars I found it to be true with was Castor and Pollux, the white head, the red head.
Yeah. It's interesting, while we're on that, just briefly, I noticed that in Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, the stars that he gives for the Bohemian, the planet attributions that he gives for the Bohemian stars are sometimes different than the ones Ptolemy gave. And I believe he mentioned something about it coming from the color. So maybe that's why it's different.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah.
Right.
But yeah, Ptolemy, I think, was doing it a different way.
Well, I think Ptolemy got his from somebody else, and I'll bet they're really old.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to stick with Ptolemy to work with it, and it seems to work pretty well. As you were mentioning, and I've got my little cursor here, he's got Saturn rising in his chart, and this chart actually really works for him. I mean, if somebody figured it out or whatever, but it has Thuban on the rising, and Thuban is a part of Draco. Well,
Dragon.
Yes, the big main character in The Hobbit is Smaug
The
and the
dragon.
Dragon's Hoard.
Yeah.
Right. So the whole first story centers on the Dragon's Hoard, but it also can mean finding treasures.
Well, you know what else? I mean, that Saturn is conjunct a star of Draco as well. And I think that I think that Ptolemy said the stars of Draco are like Saturn. So you have let's see. Yeah, Ptolemy, the stars are like Saturn and Mars, the
Yes.
stars of Draco. So you have Saturn is conjunct a star called Nodus 1, which is like Zeta Draco, I guess.
Yes.
And then this ascendant is conjunct Thuban, the alpha star of Draco. And yeah, I made that connection right away, like dragon guy, you know, hello. The
Yeah.
one, right?
And then his Saturn at 0 Libra is angular, it's exalted, it's conjunct the galactic North Pole of the Milky Way and the supergalactic center, which is 29 something.
So here's those cosmic structures that you were talking about.
Right. And then it's square Mercury, which is conjunct Spiculum, Polus, and the intersection of the ecliptic and the galactic equator. So you have two planets square one another, both at 0 degrees cardinal.
And both at very important crossroads.
Right. Both at crossroads, and they're angular, which really actually works.
And you know, when you mention angularity, it's interesting because if you rotate this chart to be a sunrise chart, which the Hindus call that the Surya Lagna, meaning sunrise, you know, sunrise. Saturn is culminating as the sun rises. So there's a different kind of angularity there,
right,
which is still important. That's a paran, basically. Yeah, and so there's a lot going on here, and it's fascinating to me. Like right away, I picked up, oh my God, Mercury, the writer, right? Mercury's retrograde, and it's retrograde in a way that it's separating from the sun in the morning sky, so it's oriental. So this Mercury, and it's about 12 degrees from the sun. So in a few days, this Mercury is going to make a visible appearance. Right. This is known as phasis, right? Mercury is going to appear in the sky. And in the myth of Hermes, what does Mercury do on the first day of the myth in the hymn? He steals his brother's cows and you know, that whole deal. So you have this trickster, you know, archetype, very much, you know, like, you know, it reminds me of hobbits. It reminds me of the whole, you know, he created this world. Actually, he created this world so he would have someone to speak this language that he invented.
But remember, Mercury is also a burglar, and that's what Bilbo did.
That's what Bilbo did. He stole the ring, you know.
The dragon's sword or whatever.
You know.
So we're immediately seeing the storylines in his chart. But I also think, you know, his father died when he was young. He was moved from South Africa back to England. His mother converted from whatever religion they were to Catholicism, which is just bizarre. Yeah. And then he was brought up with a priest as his guardian. And he was told not to hook up with Edith, who was not Catholic. And he stayed away from her for 3 years. He did obey.
Wow.
He graduated.
It, man?
Well, they were more obedient back then, I guess. But he was very dependent, I think, on this individual. So he made his choice. Yeah. And he obviously made his choice. But the minute that prohibition was up, he married her. And she agreed. She agreed to marry him. And I find that so interesting because Mercury has this perfect sextile to the moon.
Yeah.
Perfect sextile. And you know, Spiculum, as I note in the book, is connected with Creus the Inquirer, which is a Titan god. And he's married to a lunar goddess. So you're linking this position at the intersection of the south side of the ecliptic or the north end of the ecliptic with this Titan that's married to a moon goddess, and you have Mercury sextile moon. He and Edith were like perfectly linked. They just meshed. They clung tightly because I think, you know, this sun or the Mercury Saturn square, he had so many losses in his early life.
Yeah, he really appreciated when he found love, he really appreciated it, right?
right, profound losses. Not only did he lose his father, and he lost his mother then fairly young, but then almost all of his graduating class died in World War One. So everybody was dying. That's very Saturn rising. And scoring Mercury, it's not just your parents, it's also your friends. And so, he literally made up imaginary characters to keep him company.
Right, right.
And in the trenches was coming up with this language. But I also think Saturn also relates with the Mercury square to ancient languages and dead languages,
Yeah.
languages.
Ancient dead languages. And what's really interesting, I think you bring this point up in your bio there, in your essay, is that he was trying to create a language that would restore what was lost when the Romans took over the British Isles. And there he was trying to get back to some connection to the indigenous people of the British Islands, to the indigenous roots of his heritage, his own indigenous heritage.
Right, mythology, not language, mythology. And the mythology involved the language. That was a key part of it. I mean, there's interviews of him saying that. I wanted to replace the mythology that was lost when the Romans came in and swapped all of our locals for their Roman gods, which it was just gone. There was no written record at that point because the Romans didn't write much down. At some, I mean, if there's anything written down, it's in Caesar.
Yeah. So let's think about this for a second. So Mercury's conjunct this solstice point, which is this, cardinal point, and so therefore it's very tied into the socio-political matrix, right? But it's also conjunct this galactic equator, and this galactic equator is in the process of coming into alignment with this, and that only happens every 26,000 years. And so he was literally trying to recover another age, a previous age when when the current culture that came in, as the Romans came in and wiped out whatever was there before, that was lost, and it's like, wow. And then this, he never expected any of these books to be famous or anything. I mean, here he is. He knows he's a geek, and he's geeking out on ancient dead languages and making up these fairy tales. And then miraculously, at the time of the exact alignment between the galactic equator and the solstice, this guy who has Mercury, his natal Mercury right there, they start making movies out of his books, and it just explodes into the collective conscious. I mean,
right, it became global at that point. Went from being a really a massively popular, well-selling book of the 20th century, or the series, into this massive global phenomenon about, right around that time when
that's exactly what the Uranian people say about that. That's the world point, right? That's where it becomes global. Yeah, it's just fascinating example, extremely potent example of these cosmic intersections and how they can be really potent and how they work. Yeah.
Right, but he's got a twofer. And I would always also point out is looking at his Venus is conjunct to Saturn Mercury stars. His moon is conjunct to Saturn Mercury star. There's a lot of Saturn Mercury stars contacting in here. And I would bring up Cambalia, which is a star in the foot of Virgo, and it's conjunct his Uranus in the second house. And he's got Uranus trine moon, that's true, but Cambalia is called the Merlin Star or the Wizard Star. And obviously you get dragons, you get hobbits, now you get wizards. And he actually called the order of wizards were the Istari, I star E. and it's not just conjunct in longitude, it's also conjunct in declination. So he's like got a super conjunction to Uranus. It's almost to the degree in minute.
Wow.
Very, very, he's got a double helping of the Merlin star. So the idea of, the real mover and shaker in Middle Earth is Gandalf.
Yeah.
He's the one that's behind pulling the strings and engineering this next age. And I also think too, just having Mercury and Saturn on those intersections, those Aries points, it also makes him think in terms of ages. He's
Yeah.
not thinking in short-term time cycles, not even 100 years. He's thinking of tens of thousands of years.
Right.
I got onto some sort of internet conversation about how old is Galadriel. Well, when the events of the Lord of the Rings take place, she's 6,800 years old.
Yeah.
And
by the way, 6,800 years, you know what that is? That's a quarter. That's a quarter. That's the last time that the galactic equator was conjunct one of the 4 solstice points, is what that is. You notice that?
yeah, it's right around there, isn't it?
26,000-year cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's very interesting from the standpoint of, that his 2 major female characters, Arwen Evenstar and Galadriel, are Lucian de Nouviel, the morning star and the evening star. So he's relating them to Venus's phases. And he's very precise in Lord of the Rings about the lunar phases in the book. So he has a very galactic perspective, but it's even more so when you get into the Silmarillion, which people haven't really read. It's deep, it's dense, it's long, it's difficult, but the first 2 chapters are absolutely gorgeous. And I brought this up with a lot of people over time, and it's like, it is the only actual cosmogony that's written in English. And he follows almost all of the rules of ancient cosmogonies that he was familiar. How did the gods create the universe or the cosmos?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's the only one that was originally written in English. Like, the Edda Semundar was written in ancient Icelandic. He read it, he knew it. The ancient Hindu ones are written in Sanskrit, the ancient, Israeli and Greek and Roman, all of those languages, but there were no cosmogonies written in English.
Mm.
So, and it's beautiful. I mean, I've read all those cosmogonies. I've read them all. His is literary, in a literary sense, probably the most beautiful. It really is. It's right up there with the Sanskrit run. It's gorgeous.
Mm.
He misses a few key points of what you'd find in Hamlet's Mill about the cosmic markers and the cosmic, would you say, they're disguised as things like, the mast of a ship in Hamlet's Mill is a code for the axis, the north-south axis, the galactic, our north-south celestial poles.
Right.
And they use other snakes or things like that are metaphors for the circles, the galactic, the ecliptic, the galactic equator, the supergalactic equator, which ancient people knew about this stuff. They knew. They're very, very, very smart, probably smarter than us sometimes. They weren't laden with cell phones and computers and stuff like that.
Yeah, this idea that he has, these planets on this mundane cross, and there's this, Mercury is essentially conjunct the galactic equator, which is pretty close to the galactic center. And so bring in the center idea, like this cosmogony is, what is a cosmogony but a recentering? It's how did all this start? Where is the center?
Where's the beginning?
Sorry?
Where is the beginning? How
Where's
did it
the
start?
Yeah, where's our
Right.
center?
And then some cosmogonies start with light and others start with sound.
Yeah.
The Hindu one starts with sound, and so does his in the Silmarillion. I
Mm.
think it's the Valaquenta or something like that, the first book or the first chapter of it. And it's interesting because, you choose what's first, light or sound. He chose sound, but then the sound manifests into shapes and forms.
Logos, in the beginning was the word. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one version, but in Hindu, it's Om. It's the sound.
Yeah.
Om manifested the world.
Right.
And as Shiva takes steps, he creates and destroys with every step, right? So it's a very profound idea. But I think the idea, in his chart, he has Aldebaran on the near the midheaven with Neptune and Pluto. He's one of that 1892 to 84 gang of kids that was born with Neptune, Pluto conjunct. So right there, you get a certain amount of weirdness in Venus trines. So,
yeah,
he's got a pipeline right into Neptune, Pluto through Venus. And then Rigel is on his midheaven. So that takes him into the zeitgeist and draws him into the whirlpool of current events. And, he didn't register being famous. It was so alien to him. He wrote them, he put them out, he sold books, he made some money, and then people started walking up to him and acknowledging him. Celebrity did not sit well. He didn't do it for that.
Right.
He just simply didn't. But he has so many fortunate stars. And I think it's very interesting that, Achernar and Anka, which is the Phoenix star. Achernar is
River.
Alpha Eridanus.
Yeah.
And it's a deep, deep south star at 60 south.
Anka's pretty far south too.
Well, it's even deeper south. It's almost at 80. It's almost at the south celestial pole. So giving it a longitude degree is kind of stupid, but there you go. But Achernar is the only Jupiter attributed star in the entire river of Eridanus. And if you think about this quite literally, it's in the west. Now, everything in Tolkien is about going to the west.
Yeah.
The secret
And
land.
there's a river. There's a journey on the river,
Right. There's journeys on rivers, but everything about the afterlife and the secret world of the elves in Valinor is all in the west. It's this wonderful forbidden land. And there is Jupiter, the goodies in his western seventh house. It's almost literal. And the moon's there too. The moon is just set to the west. So, I mean, some of his stuff, he is quite literal about how it comes out in his books. And he has Vega conjunct Sun, which is always good for writers.
Yeah, Vega, Alpha Lyra, if you just think of the lyra, the lyre, the musical instrument. I have seen this show up in a lot of comedians' charts. There's a lot of famous comedians. I think just this idea of putting on a show and being a performer, creating music, the beginning of his universe was the sound, right? Was
right.
And so with this musical quality, yeah. And that's a very bright, very powerful star, Vega. Yes. It's one of the 15 Bohemian stars. Yes. And so yeah, to have the sun conjunct that star, I'm glad you brought that up because that's here's another thing with these ages, Vega was a pole star once upon a time, right? It's part of that northern circle of pole stars that, ages and ages ago. So he's aligned to a pole star of another age, both and then his Mercury is aligned with this thing that's coming of an age that's coming into being.
Yes.
So it's really fascinating, this chart, and I think you did. It's a really wonderful opportunity to bring these various concepts into and put them on display. And I just think you did a really fabulous job with that one. I really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you. It's so fascinating because when you look at his chart just off the cuff without any stars, you're not necessarily getting great author. When you start adding the stars in, it's like, oh my God, it's like he was programmed to do this.
Yeah.
And
even Zubin Escamali, right? The northern claw of that one's associated with writers somehow, I noticed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because, the one thing that comes up again and again and again in Aeonic legends of Aeon changes is that religion changes. The old religion gets overthrown for the new. And it takes hundreds of years. It's not quick. But we're looking at Aeonic changes, and he wrote about Aeonic changes, but his books were published in the 20th century, which is the beginning of an Aeonic change.
Right.
We're going to have a few centuries of Aquarius stars and Pisces stars overlapping at the spring equinox. It's going to be some hundreds of years before we really have pure age of Aquarius.
Right.
But in the meantime, it's like, this guy is focusing on a mythology that's a revival, but yet it's all fresh. And it opens up this whole idea of, something that is not born of a religion, but just born of sheer creativity.
Yeah.
And there's no God messing up with this, even though it's about gods. No, he's never claimed it's like, oh, I was inspired by God to do this. He wasn't. He was a Christian mystic. And his legends, his books are very paganish. And paganism has grown in leaps and bounds over the last 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
That moving away from traditional religions and kind of going into neo-paganism in a way. And honestly, Lord of the Rings goes right along with all that.
Yeah, it really
And
does.
it does present its own cosmogony in the Silmarillion. So I'm just wildly impressed with this chart once I started looking at it. And even as part of fortune in his 11th house talks to you, because it's conjunct Castor, who got him to deal with Unwin, his buddy. His buddy, C.S. Lewis, part of fortune in the 11th house. Where are your resources? It is through his friends that The Hobbit was published.
Yeah, and C.S. Lewis was very religious, which is interesting because he was intensely religious. Aslan is pretty much an allegory for Christ.
Right, right,
Yeah.
sure. And he was really pushing that, but yet Tolkien was bringing his little Hobbit stories into the Inklings group and reading sections. I mean, they kind of gave each other advice about how they were writing things, but how he actually got published was through his friend. And that's Castor, the writer's star, which does have a lot to do with writing and journalism. With the part of fortune, his friends in the 11th house of good spirits, his friends helped him get published.
And it's really one of a pair of twins. Yeah.
He wasn't really aiming for publication. It was The Hobbit was just a story he told his kids and started writing down. There was no deliberate intention. And then his children, fifth house, have been the ones who've carried on the tradition. Now, Christopher Tolkien just died, but there's a whole bunch more stuff in the archives that is being published over the next few years.
Wow.
They still haven't finished going through his notes.
Wow.
They've got a book about his Arthurian work, his work with the ancient Icelandic sagas. It's unbelievable how much writing this guy did. He's just uber prolific. And I think that speaks to, Venus and the moon, both in his 6th house of work. He just was prolific. And moon sextile Mercury. Oh my gosh, he just was writing and writing and writing and writing. So, they put a transcript in about his BBC radio interview about Icelandic poetry. Oh my God, he's such a genius. So, you don't expect what you get out of this, but the ancient languages, which I see as very Saturn, Mercury, dead languages, but they also drew him into this whole new world of creation, of universe creating, planet creating. Middle Earth isn't Earth, it's kind of Earth, but it's not.
Yeah.
So you want to look at one more chart?
Yeah, we can do one more. We got time for a little bit more.
Okay, so I did Bob Dylan.
Excellent.
And his chart's very different, but I think it's interesting just right off the cuff that he has Russell Hogg rising.
Oh my God, right? Hercules, Alpha Hercules.
No, that's Russell Geffy. Russell Hogg is the head of Ophiuchus.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, got it.
Yeah, and that's the snake charmer.
The snake charmer.
He's singing with that snake charming voice, and think about his songs are patter.
Yes.
Because it's freight train lyrics.
Yes.
It's almost
Alnitak comes up with that too, because Alnitak is one of 3 stars that form the belt of Orion. And so there's this series of 3 stars, and he's constantly, Mercury, spitting out these series of words and images. I thought that was very similar, Yeah.
Right. And it's a Saturn Mercury. And here he has Sun Hyades, Saturn, Mercury. You see this prevalence in Mufrid and Seganus, Buete stars on the midheaven, both Saturn, Mercury.
Yeah, Buete's on the midheaven, right? Saturn, Mercury, and he's got a Saturn, Mercury sextile.
Right. So they're perfectly sextile. And even though, Venus isn't really in aspect to Saturn, which is conjunct Botine, which is a star of Aries that is Venus ruled. It's an oddball. It's like the baby sheep in the Aries, the weekend lamb. It's the lambing star. But her antition is sextile Saturn.
Interesting.
So she has a relationship with him because she disposits him, but by intention, she also sextiles him. So his Saturn in its own face and term or whatever in Taurus, which is a horrible place for Saturn and the moon, but yet they're both conjunct this fecund star, and he's written hundreds of songs.
Yeah.
And this was the other thing. It's like a shooting match there in the fifth house, right? The moon and Saturn are both conjunct Botian, but Uranus is just enough past that it's conjunct Misam instead of Algol. Then Jupiter's conjunct the Pleiades and Sun is conjunct the Hyades.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
never seen
that
anything like this.
Jupiter conjunction with the Pleiades are, the seven sisters. They're, goddesses who were, very sort of like, in fact, the mother of Hermes is there, Maya, and she lived in a cave. They were remote and distant, and he managed to keep remote and distance from, while still being like very much bound up in the social drama. He managed to keep kind of remote and distant his personal his persona. He was able to keep some distance from that, which I thought.
Yeah, well, look at Venus. Venus is in the sixth house, Caden, and it's sextile Saturn. He limits how much contact people have with him. Venus is very buckled up.
Yeah.
With Saturn.
And with the Pleiades there with Jupiter, there's that, that revealing, in magic, that star is said to reveal secret and hidden things, and there's the symbol for that star is literally like a magic lamp, and so, and that's what, to me, his lyrics have this quality of revealing these secrets, they're very occult in nature almost.
Yes.
Like there's these secret things that we all think about, but he's actually talking about them and bringing them out into the open, so that to me, like that one, wow. Yeah.
Well, and think about this too. Jupiter is our largest planet, and then there's our sun, Pleiades and Hyades. Jupiter is actually closely conjunct the star within the Pleiades called Atlas. Atlas was the father of the Pleiades and the Hyades. Two different mothers, but Pleione, which is where the name comes from, was the mother of the Pleiades. Hyades are named Hyades because the sisters were weeping for their brother who had been killed.
Right.
So, you get all this sense of sorrow, but think about this. It's like the two big gods conjunct group of women stars.
Yeah.
Which is odd. It's odd. But I also think it's about fecundity, because it's just, this sense of like he's got worlds inside of him.
Yeah. And I think he was very much in touch with the sacred and the mystical side of the feminine. I mean, he writes about all these mystical and sort of these women that he looks at as mystical and sacred, and where he talks about she serves the gods. She's not worldly. He talks about these different female figures that would be perfect personifications of these goddesses that are showing up there in the chart.
Right, but you also see here that Uranus is trine Neptune in the ninth house, which does make him spiritual, but at least for a period in his life, he was a reborn Christian.
Right.
Or in the late 70s, and went through this whole evangelical phase, and honestly, people didn't like it.
No, but you know what? I like the Christian albums, man. I think Slow Train Coming. I mean, Mark Knopfler is on that album, man. It's like, holy crap. He had that's the other thing. He surrounded himself with the cream of musicians. I mean, I remember when I was in college, he was touring with that guy that used to play on Saturday Night Live. I'm trying to think of his name right now, but he had that guy for his guitarist at the time, and he always had really excellent musicians in his band, and stuff. So it seems like, the Christian thing, it's interesting because he's Jewish, right?
Yeah.
And he converts to Christianity, and he writes these, and you know what he had to say about the time? Yeah, 10 years ago, y'all were calling me a prophet. And when I come out here and try to tell you something that's actually, about God, you don't want to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that sort of fell on deaf ears, but certainly, the sun in the sixth house, the working house with the Heidi's, is he played with groups, but they were all top quality and they got a lot of positive attention. And, I found it interesting that Venus is conjunct Tabit, which is the hand that holds the shield of Orion.
Mm,
He keeps a pretty tight fist
yeah,
on top of the group. He's in control of what goes out. He's in charge. He's not one of the band. He's the lead guy,
yeah,
and Venus is his 10th house ruler, but boy, he's in charge of that band. And the other contact I sort of tickled out of there too was, the Mars antition at 25 Libra, which I think, makes the contact to Mercury in his 10th house. So both of Venus and Mars as antitions, they're planets that aren't in angular houses, but their antitions are.
mm, interesting.
And all of a sudden there's all these contacts to, you have Mars and Mercury, you have Venus and Saturn. It's hidden, it's invisible, which is why I love antitions, because
Yeah,
that's another thing that brings secrets out. But you
that,
wouldn't think with the guy that has, Mars square sun in Mars in the second house, it'd be like this guy would be burning through money. But on the other hand, there he's got Mars trine Mercury on the seventh, so he's making it faster than he can burn it.
I mean, the guy's been on tour. They call it the never-ending tour. He's been on
Yeah.
tour for what, 30 years straight?
Yeah, the never-ending
Dates
tour.
every year.
Absolutely.
Unbelievable, the drive,
Yes.
Um,
And that's he just is enormously prolific, but I think it's interesting that he has gone through so many phases.
yeah,
He keeps
he's
changing it up.
reinventing himself. Yeah,
And I think maybe that could be this ninth house copula M51, which is part of Canes Venatici, and it's a Mercury Mars. And again, we have this Mercury Mars connection in the chart, hidden, but it's there, and it's contacting Neptune. And I think that is, you see that in David Bowie's chart too. The Neptune has a lot to do with this constant reinvention, constantly tapping into new things, constantly hearing new sounds in your head, trying to do things differently and reinvent yourself.
yeah. Well, Mercury and Gemini. I mean, I mean that's. Did you notice? Did you have any thoughts about Alheka being there with Mercury? You've got
Yeah,
Alnalak on the low side and Alheka.
right. Alheka is one of the, isn't it the North Horn? North
Yeah.
Horn, of course. If you've ever noticed how he sings, he kind of pokes at you. He when he's singing, which is Mercury on the descendant, he's poking. He almost jabs you with the
Oh my
words.
God, yeah. I mean,
And so it's
some of his
about
most famous songs, like a Rolling Stone, he's definitely poking at somebody there,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
pretty hard.
He's very emphatic in his delivery of some songs, not all of them, but the protest songs.
Yeah,
But yeah, like a Rolling Stone is a good example, but there's other ones where
Positively 4th Street, he's definitely poking at
right, hard
somebody.
times they are changing,
Yeah,
hard rain. I mean, his delivery is that poke.
yeah,
When he's
right.
trying to make a point, he
Mhm.
pokes at you. And I think that's it. But then, Venus and Gemini can also sing very sweetly too when he does Lay Lady Lay.
Yeah,
He dials it back and he's more sweet and it's less aggressive. But
yeah, he had taken a break for a while at that time, and then he did an album down in Nashville, and he was hanging out with Johnny Cash and brought out his sweet side, I guess.
well, you can't always be screaming and yelling, but when you get the greyhounds, the Canis Venatici, those are the pair of greyhounds that run with Pleiades.
Right.
And what I find is when people have contacts with that, there's always that group emphasis. He's part of a generation. He is part of a group of folk singers that came out in the early 60s with the civil rights movement, but then he moved to other groups. He moved to the evangelical movement. He moved to the doing standards with Frank Sinatra and Willie Nelson movement. He went to the unplugged movement and he replugged, and he's done 5 great albums in the last handful of years. I mean, the guy just keeps moving to the next group, next generation, next generation. And the other thing that I think is important to note, and this is in my essay about Pleiades, is that Mufrid and Cygnus are both, these stars work together because they're very close, and they're on his midheaven. Now, what Pleiades does is when it rises in the sky, so people that have like a late Libra, early Scorpio ascendant are going to have Boetes rising. And what you find is these people are one-shot wonders. They do one thing. Harper Lee is the perfect example. To Kill a Mockingbird, never wrote another book, won a Pulitzer.
Wow.
So but she has Boetes rising, and Boetes, when it rises, it's like a jack in the box. It jumps into the sky. But when you get it in the 10th house, like he has it, or moving into 9th, 8th, 7th, which Michael Jackson has it here, you get long careers.
Interesting.
You get very lengthy careers, and Move For It is literally about having a long career. So, these are the stars of I think the arm that holds the staff, and one of his knee stars. I think Move For It's a knee star. So, you wind up actually having very long career activity when you see, as opposed to the one-shot wonders when it's on the rising, it sets very slowly. So it's really good to have those signs in this part of your chart. If you've got
I thought that
contact to them.
Boetes on the midheaven was really apropos in the sense that in your essay about Boetes, I think you talk about it being like, sort of hyper masculine. It's a very like heroic star. And he created this whole mythos of how he sort of, he had this hero that he looked up to, Woody Guthrie, and then he kind of recreated himself in Woody Guthrie's image. He left Minnesota and hitchhiked to New York City and kind of was reborn. And and so there's this sort of heroic kind of male, hero kind of archetype that he's sort of always, trying to. That's his
He's the bard. He's the bard.
Yeah. He's trying to.
He's the poet of his generation, and obviously, he's got all the big god stars, Jupiter and Sun, the Hyades, the Pleiades, Mufred and Second Boetes at the midheaven. Yeah, you get to be bigger in life when you have connections like that. He's just larger than life. He takes on godlike proportions within the culture. He isn't a god. He doesn't want to be a god, but that doesn't mean that people don't perceive him that way, as a kind of, immortal human.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's won just about every award there is to win at this point,
Yes, including, I just discovered, he won a special Pulitzer citation and a Nobel Prize for Literature in 2016.
Right? Grammys, Emmys, Pulitzers.
Yeah, and I think that ties in with this Mars thing, because Mars rules his 11th house, and it's trine Mercury by Antition. Mercury and Mars have a connection, and it makes all of his Mercury-Mars stuff in this, Mercury-Mars stars that he's got, it makes them work better.
Yeah,
The
that's
Venus
really remarkable. I like that you're bringing that in, because we started out talking about these planet combinations for the stars. And then what you're saying is that when you have a connection between those two planets in the nativity, and you have a bunch of those planet-star combinations, it just sort of like makes those two planets really supercharged.
It supercharges the star. So here you have Venus sextile Saturn, even if by Antition, and she's happy. She loves it. She's in Cancer. She's in the 7th house. And there you get Razelhag, the ultimate snake charmer, the guy that can sing you any place you want to go. Because he's associated with just endless travels, but his styles cover all the bases. Every major genre that's pretty much come out in the past 40 years, he's hopped on almost all of them. He never did dance music per se, but all the other cultural genres.
Thank God we didn't have Dylan doing disco.
No, there was no Dylan disco. He skipped that because he was busy being reborn as an evangelical at this point, which is probably better.
Disco and do God for a while.
But he did country. He did country western. And then he shifted over back to the folk stuff, but then he was doing the American Songbook. And he started with the roots in the folk music. So my God, this guy has hit most of the major genres, and he sold over 1 million albums, which makes him one of the best-selling artists.
I think this is a really good example of a chart. It doesn't have any of the big, stars that, like the royal stars. You don't have like Regulus or, but
Oh, but
there's a,
he does. He does. Orion's belt is super lucky. He left home at the right time and went to New York at the right time, invented himself at the right time. He had the right thoughts at the right time. And I think it's because of the Hyades and the Pleiades. He is so plugged into the zeitgeist, especially of the 60s. But it's
Mhm.
interesting. I also realized that he had a big motorcycle accident in 66.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, well, he had those big three albums, his early trilogy of albums, and then he had the motorcycle accident. Now, some people say that the motorcycle accident was more hype than fact. We know the accident happened, and we know that he took significant amount of time off after the accident. Now, whether he just needed the time off and hyped the accident to buy himself that time, but during that time, he went away and he kind of reinvented himself. He came, like I said, he ended up, the next album was Nashville Skyline, where he went country, like you said, hanging out with Johnny Cash. And then he went up to New York and started hanging out with the band, you
Yes.
know. And so I think, and I think, if you listen to the album that came before that, where, he does a half folk album, half electric album, and he, songs like "It's All Over Now, Baby Blue." He's basically telling people like, this is only going to go so far, and that's it. Like, you're going to have to, find another way. You're going to have to find another hero. I'm not going to be this thing that you're trying to pigeonhole me as, right? It's like, it's go start anew. And he's kind of foreshadowing his own, departure in a way to me, when I look at
Right,
that.
but do you see that as that Sun square Mars? Is that when he's bored with something, he's done and he walks away,
Yeah. Yeah,
and just brutally almost, but it's Saddleakbia. I can't say that name, Saddleakbia. It's an Aquarius star. It's in the early degrees of Pisces, and I believe it's in the Saddle-Sud mansion. That mansion, that Arabic mansion. So it's a
yeah,
very lucky zone. But it's like when he's done with it, he's done with it, and he moves on. But he always lands on his feet.
yeah. The square is of the nature of Mars because in the thema mundi, the
Yes.
sun is in Leo and Mars is in Scorpio. So the square aspect is of the nature of Mars. And here you have Sun, Mars square. So remember last time we said that when the sun was rising, Saturn was culminating. In
Yes.
this chart, when the sun is rising,
Rising
Mars is
Mars is
culminating.
culminating. Yeah.
Okay. So
And
yeah, it's a very Martian. It's like, when he made the switch to electric, literally there, there's a film of him and they come out and they start playing and somebody in the back of the crowd yells, Judas. And they're saying that he's a traitor for going electric.
electric.
And he turns around and you know what he says to the band? Play it fucking loud. He's just like, I'm going, man. And you can call me whatever you want, but I'm going.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, there's this
He is
very,
very hard-headed eye, but I think Razzlehog means he keeps winning people back, winning people over, getting new fans. I mean, it just doesn't end. But I do think that godlike thing is the Jupiter Sun conjunction and having Mufred and Seganus and essentially the constellation of Shupa, the Boetes on the midheaven, because Boetes is a silly Greek story. It's just so dumb when you dial it back to the Mesopotamian legend of Shupa, which is an aspect of Enlil, the king of the gods,
yeah,
who's turning the plow of the sky
right.
and carving the destiny of kings and nations.
Right. That's what I
Yes,
was getting at earlier. I mean, that's on his midheaven. I mean, that's a pretty major, and
yeah,
this guy hung out with like some pretty hardcore, people in his time, world
yes,
shakers and movers.
yes. But he hasn't worked with a lot of women, not too many, some, but not many. It's not something he's known for. I mean, like Robert Plant's gone off and made all these albums with different women,
Right. Yeah.
and other singers have worked with women and whatever, but he really doesn't. It's all about the guy thing, and it's Mars. He's very Mars dominated.
Yeah, and Boetes is very masculine, like you
It
said
is.
too, you know. So there
Yeah,
you go.
Arcturus and whatever. So yes, but I think it's a fascinating chart. I'd like to mention Talitha, which is conjunctus Pluto, and that is the paw of the bear. It's the paw of Ursa Major. A
Mm,
lot of those Ursa Major stars land in Leo and Virgo
right.
because so far north, it's distorted. But we wind up with an enormous constellation spread out over almost 3 signs.
Yeah.
But this is the front end of the bear, and it's this forepaw, and it's Pluto. It's like this guy takes the first step,
Ah,
and he's
interesting.
ruthless about it.
Mm-hmm.
And Ursa Major stars have that sort of force of nature going for them, and it's a
Yeah,
Mars star,
right.
and it's in conjunct Mars, and it's like sextile the sun. Everything in this chart kind of points to, I'm going to go where I go and do what I do and do what I want, and if you don't like it, bite my berry butt.
Take me on a trip upon your magic swirling ship.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah,
and
'cause
and he's
bears are travelers, man. That's a really good point because bears can cover like 40 miles in a day,
yeah,
easy, and they
yeah.
just amble along. They ain't even working at it, you know.
No,
Yeah.
no. And that's why I think the Pluto contact is so important, because then it winds up, and forgive me for doing this to you, the same planet comes up in Frank Zappa, who's the same age. He also has the bear paw.
Interesting.
He also has it. And he also has, here he has Rathal Gessi on the rising. So they both have these, the head of Ophiuchus and the head of Hercules are both on rising. It's like, and I was like looking at this going, oh my God, it's like the same story all over again. It's just a very powerful, powerful chart. And he has multiple contacts with Ophiuchus and Hercules again and again,
Mm.
all over again. And he's got Sun Spiculum, which is
It's
Tolkien.
interesting that I misspoke when I was talking about Ras Al Hagi and I said Ras Al Gethi, but I must have been psychic tuning in to the fact that you had
Right,
this
right.
one up
He's
your
got
sleeve.
Razel Hogg and he's got Razel Gethi, the two. And the thing is, they're very close. It's easy to confuse them.
Yeah,
In Arabic, Jedi or Jetsi is the giant, and Hercules is an enormous constellation.
yeah, it really is. Yeah.
So Al Jeti is the head of the giant, very
Right,
literally.
right.
Whereas I forget the translation of Razel Hog, but it's literally the head of the snake charmer,
Yeah.
and you get people with that contact.
It's
you know?
literally like right there in the crown chakra, right? In the
Right, exactly.
yeah.
And it's so bedazzling. You just are dazzled by all the stuff that he does. Whereas, where you more have Frank and Russell Guffey, Frank's really intense into his own little world.
I can't really speak. I'm not a Zappa fan, so I really can't
Well,
speak to that part.
Frank is again the bear paw, cutting in a new turf, but his moon's conjunct to Nebula, which is the tail of the lion. It's the lion's tail, and it thrashes back and forth. So there's that big unpredictability. But he's got Zavi, Java, and Zania at the top, which are both really lucky, good career stars at the midheaven. So, he's got great career stuff. He really does. And he's just very different and very intense, but he's super smart. And you find that with people that have a lot of Hercules, is they tend to see the big picture, because Hercules is almost at that Arctic Circle, or the northern
That's
constellation.
interesting you mention that because one of the examples I use for that star is Martin Luther.
Yeah.
Martin Luther had Mercury conjunct Ras Al Gethi, and he was known as the German Hercules. They literally saw him as this heroic figure that took on the Pope, and so yeah, and he obviously, his thing was he was a monk that wrote his theses and nailed them to the church wall and changed religion forever with the schism that resulted from that.
Right. And then you get these two people born in 40 and 41. So Bob is 5 months younger, 6 months younger than Frank. But you have these ties between their charts that they both just cut through all the crap and rebelled. I mean, Frank's songs, a lot are about rebellion. And then some of it's just nasty. He only did like really one even semi-commercial album. And even that only had a few semi-commercial songs, most of which could never get played on the radio. So Susie Cream Cheese and Dirty Love and stuff like that. He had some nasty stuff, but he's absolutely brilliant and he's a brilliant musician, but he's content to live in his own little kingdom. Whereas Bob builds kingdoms wherever he goes.
Interesting.
Bob has a larger scope than Frank did. Although I think Frank is turning into being much more prophetic, truly prophetic after his death. People have realized what he said and how important it was. He really had a lot to say. And the same with Jimi Hendrix. There's an autobiography of things he wrote during his lifetime. And I think it's just called, Jimi Hendrix. It's the self-titled autobiography, right? And it was things assembled from notes, that stuff he scribbled on pizza boxes.
Wow.
And it's amazing, and transcripts of interviews. So it's him in his own words. And
I think Hendrix also has the Russell Gethy star as well, doesn't he? You know what's crazy? Hendrix and Rob Hand were born within a few days of each other.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me, but these stars are very, very close. They're only a few degrees apart. So that's why they get confused so easily. But Jimmy is a Sag. He's got to pick up on either Hercules or Haphiakis.
Yeah.
But they both obviously very philosophical, big picture, seeing beyond. And then I think with Haphiakis, there's that sort of alchemy factor as well.
Yeah.
Because you're mixing medicines. But I mean, Frank even has a nucleohide, which can be about poisons. That's the head of the snake. That's Alpha Serpens. And it's a big star.
It's at the other end of the serpent that Ophiuchus is wrestling with. Yeah.
Well, right. And at some point they made it a separate constellation. It's now called Alpha Serpens.
Right.
But it's also the head of the snake. So it's, Caput Serpens. So, his Mars is conjunct the head of the snake. And Frank can be a little nasty. And some of his stuff gets close to being poisonous because, well, you can't really play him on mainstream radio. He didn't get past the censor. He was using the F-bomb long before Pearl Jam ever dreamed of it. He plowed new territory with the F-bomb. I mean, he just did. And some of his sex talk and his nasty stuff. I mean, Dirty Love is such a funny song, but it's about doing things with a poodle.
Jesus.
You never heard Dirty Love?
No,
oh, you gotta look that up.
Frank Zappa at all. I had never.
You'd like Dirty Love because it's his one pop song. It's his nod to pop music, and it's just delightful. But it's so nasty, and poodle bite. Come on, baby, poodle choose it, snap it, and you're like, oh my God, Frank, where are you going with this? But it's delightful. It's actually a delightful song. It's one of my favorite Zappa songs. Whereas Bob Dylan, there's just so many things to choose from. It's an endless smorgasbord of fabulous songs that you can sing along to, and people all know the words. If somebody's playing like a Rolling Stone in a bar, everybody's singing along because everybody knows the words. Well, at least our generation knows all the
words. Yeah, it's hard to say anymore. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really, really love the book. It's got a 5-star review on Amazon. You should check it out. The Little Book of Fixed Stars, and it's a big little book, and this has been fun. I really hope that a lot more people start paying attention to the fixed stars, and I think you've done something wonderful to help that happen, and so thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you mentioned Antisha a few times while we were talking, and I want to tell people that eventually that's the next show. I'm going to do a review of your Antisha book.
Cool.
And we'll have to have you back to talk about that one.
Oh, I love Antisha. They're so sneaky. All the chapters are sneaky tips for this, sneaky tips for that, because they're so sneaky. I mean, they're invisible, underhanded little, it's
Shadow
like
points, mirror points.
Your secret weapon in the chart. It's so wonderful. You dig out everybody's dirt in their natal chart. You find all their dirty secrets. It's wonderful. I love them. So yes, I'd be happy to come back sometime and do Antisha.
Sounds great.
thumbs up
I
on that.
appreciate
Thank you
it and
so much.
looking forward to it. Thanks for being
Okay.
on the show.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.